All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody back to the LaSpace Academy Session 8. I cannot believe we are on the tail end of our academy and our time together, at least for this first part. We've already got the level 2 in the works. Sherry and I have some really great news for you in terms of progressing with that. The applications will be open very soon, so you'll all be able to apply for level 2. Just to be aware of, or to give you information in terms of what it takes to be accepted, we're looking at a variety of things. So we look at your attendance and your participation, not only in the actual sessions, but we go back and we actually look at your engagement with your team on Trello, and we want to know exactly um, how committed you are to the team and to the project as well. But we're looking forward to announcing the launch of the applications for level 2. It's going to be a very exciting new project for all of us. So that's where we're at with that. I'm sure a lot of you have some questions regarding the internships as well. We have heard from approximately half of our mentors, and we've been notifying some students, but we still have some internship slots that are available and haven't been filled yet. So once we get those final notices from our other mentors, Sherry and I will be announcing our ASU interns as well. So we're excited about that, and that should be any day now. So be ready to receive notice of acceptance and or not. But don't worry about that. If you're not accepted, you still have time to apply for the NASA internships. We want everybody to make sure to get their applications in for that. The deadline is coming up. It's April 1st. So you want to make sure you apply today if you haven't already done so, and make sure that you've got your letters of recommendation or your mentors that are writing these for you, that they're very aware of that with advance. Don't email them the day before you need it and ask them for a letter. So can everybody hear me? I just want to verify that my audio is coming through. Thumbs up if you do. Jacob Miller, give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Jacob. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our guest speaker, as always, we bring you the top level of guest speakers, and in doing so, they are always on the go. So our guest speaker just flew in to his hometown, and he is en route to his home to set up. So we're excited to bring him to you very soon. As you notice, it's just me here tonight online. Sherry's actually in the session, but she's very busy. So Sherry and Jessica are currently at LPSC, and Jessica, I believe, is able to say hi. Jessica, do you want to say hi to everybody?
I would love to, actually. So I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Jess,
I'm,
I cannot hear you. Can everybody else hear Jessica?
oh no.
Maybe
Okay,
check
some
your
people,
microphone settings while Jessica does that. Just want to let you guys know. So Sherry is actually kind of listening to us. She'll be popping in and out of the session, but she's actually got a poster session going on at LPSC right now, all about the LaSpace Academy. She is there at that conference talking to everyone there about you guys. She's sharing the success that you guys have had, and is really excited about that. And Jessica did a talk there as well. So Jess, can you try it again?
yeah, so I took out my
Still can't
headphones
hear
so we could be
Jessica.
able
Sorry
to
about that.
hear me.
So Erin is asking in the chat, or she says that she'd love to see Sherry's poster. That's actually something I'll talk to Sherry about in terms of being able to share that with you guys, maybe a screenshot of that. She'll be, if possible, maybe kind of showing a little video of that session down there. I do know that it gets very busy in that area as well.
Um,
I see in the chat, Mo says he's there right now. So Mo actually had a chance to meet Sherry, and Sherry and Jessica had an opportunity to meet some of our other LaSpacers, so that's really cool. So somebody said that they can hear you, Jessica. For some reason, I can't, but go ahead and say a few words to everyone.
all right, well, hello, everyone. So I had a talk on Tuesday afternoon, and how it is at LPSC and a lot of science conferences in general is that you either have a talk that ranges between something like 10 and 15 minutes and or a poster, and you can submit multiple abstracts so you can talk about different projects that you might be working on. For example, I had my talk on my dissertation work for Europa, but then I'm also on the poster that Sherry is downstairs presenting right now. So the point of a conference is to get face-to-face time with the different people who work on similar things and to talk to them about future collaborations, about stuff that you're working on. You can share data with each other. You can basically just idea share. So it's important to get that face-to-face time. It's amazing how many different things happen at conferences just because you can see somebody and get like an immediate answer. So I'm here. I have collected many ribbons. This is one of my hobbies at conferences. So I've tried to represent many different aspects of the solar system. And I'm having a blast so far at LPSC. I usually do, though, because this is 2,000 people who study planetary science, and we all come to the same place just to talk about stuff that we love.
Awesome. And just so everyone knows, Jess, tell them what you're months away from doing. Jessica's a couple months away from something huge.
That's true. So I actually have a date now for my PhD defense, and it will be June 5th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So if you are taking part in level 2 over the summer, I will be Dr. Noviello, not Jessica anymore. I mean, you guys can still call me Jessica because, you know, I like you guys, but don't tell anybody else.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jess. Appreciate that. So Jessica's, as always, going to be our chat master in the chat. I do want to talk to everyone a little bit about your project. So we've been hearing back from some of you in terms of, I've received a variety of different emails, like things are going great with our team, everything's progressing. We are, like I said, observing your Trello boards and really kind of trying to gauge what your teamwork is like, because as we mentioned early on, our evaluators are not only evaluating what you're doing, but they're also evaluating how you're doing it, how you're actually interacting with each other, with your fellow teammates, and how you're communicating and collaborating. So that's really huge. With the, we're in session 8, and your projects are coming up, due soon. We want to just make sure to know that everyone is fully engaged in the actual project. So we appreciate everyone being here live in these sessions. It's very critical. Our expectation is you attend these sessions live, and that's great. But you're also expected to be collaborating, communicating with your team on a regular basis. So project managers and deputies, I'm talking to you right now. If you happen to have, or really anyone on the team, but if you happen to have a team member or a couple team members that you're having trouble contacting or communicating with, definitely send me their names, please. We'd like to know who they are so that we can reach out to them. For whatever reason that might be. I mean, it may be that they're extremely swamped and stressed out and feel like they're trapped in a corner and feel like they don't want to seem like they're failing the team, and so they're just kind of disconnected or feel bad about the amount of time that they've been able to dedicate. But we want to make sure that we're able to help bridge that gap for you as well. So we're here for you to talk to any of your team members that might not be around. And, saying that, I also want to note that at the end of this session, after you're done submitting your PDRs, our evaluators have put together a peer evaluation. So we're going to send this out. So each of you will have an opportunity to evaluate each team member in your team. So we're doing that for a variety of reasons. We want you to know, this is constructive feedback. This is not a chance to bash any team members, but just provide constructive feedback for each other on how you did. So that's coming up. And in addition to that, we'd also like to be on the lookout, project managers and deputies. In your Trello board, I'm going to post a set of instructions on the final submissions for your PDR. So along with the PDR being submitted in a PDF format, we actually want for you and your teams to record up to 10-minute presentation about your project. So whip up some slides, possible video, and you can utilize Zoom here or any other video conferencing platform to record a virtual presentation where you and your teammates have an opportunity to explain your PDR in an actual presentation. So I'll provide more information on the Trello board, like I said, for the project managers, and you can disseminate that to your teams. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in our next session. But I do see that our guest speaker has arrived. And so I don't want to take up too much of his time. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Brian Dansbury, and he has an amazing session for you. You know, we're all about workforce preparation here at LaSpace, and you've been interacting and engaging with a variety of different speakers that are helping prepare you for working in the space industry and at NASA. But Dr. Dansbury is going to actually help us really identify if we want to work at NASA, how do we formulate our resumes and how do we best present ourselves so that we have a better chance of actually reaching that goal? So I'm going to spotlight Brian. So Brian, how are you doing tonight? Can you hear me?
I am doing great. Can you hear me all right?
We definitely can. So I'm going to spotlight you here. So there we go. Everybody can see you now. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I know I was sharing with everyone, you're such a busy guy. You just literally hopped off a plane and drove straight home to be with us tonight.
Yeah, some days, there was a great poster I saw on the internet one time that said, it may be that the purpose of your life is to be a cautionary tale to others. And I had that kind of day today. We barely made it to the airport in time to get the luggage on the plane. The plane was 2 hours late, and I just literally walked in the door and grabbed my computer and logged in. So hopefully, I know I sent Sherry the PowerPoint.
Yes, and I have that.
Hoping you've got it there and can run it for me.
I definitely can.
Hopefully, I will say some things that are useful to everybody. Just to give you a quick feel for things, I've been where you are. I was an undergraduate aerospace engineering student, and I got an internship at NASA. It was what they call a co-op program, and co-op is basically a series of internships that are alternated with semesters at school. So I got to do 6 internships basically as part of that program at Langley Research Center way back in the past century. So I've been, looking for the internship, got lucky enough to get one at NASA, was lucky enough to be hired afterwards, was then able to be a supervisor for co-op and intern students at Langley and over the last few years at Johnson Space Center. And in between that time, I was at the University of Cincinnati and actually ran or was in charge of the aerospace and biomedical co-op programs for the University of Cincinnati. So we did Cincinnati is a school where the engineering program requires you to have internships. It's mandatory. And so they do about 4,000 terms of internship a year there. So I probably managed about 1,000 to 1,500 in the time I was there. And then I came to JSC and worked with Sherry Boonstra, and we ran some of NASA's internships programs and actually kind of reorganized them a little bit. We thought to make them a little bit better. So that's my background. I'm a very informal person. I'm going to go through a series of slides. There are more slides than I would care to talk about at one time, but I thought they had good information. They're not just slides that I've come up with. They're slides that I have borrowed from some of my colleagues in the internship world. There's some information that originally came from Georgia Tech about interviewing techniques that is going to be part of the presentation. And there's some information about resumes that come from a colleague of mine, Professor Anita Todd. She ran the co-op program at Penn State for a while and then was at the University of Cincinnati with me. So there's a lot of good information out there.
That's great, and we appreciate that, and thank you for giving everyone an overview or introduction of who you are. Before we actually jump into your slideshow, so we put together an interactive poll. We'd like to gauge, since we know you're going to be talking about resumes tonight, we were just curious to see how each of the students online tonight feel about their resume in its current state. So we want to kind of gather that. I'm going to actually put up a Menti poll for everyone. You should be able to see that now. So we're curious. So how do you feel about your current resume? Are you very confident about it, somewhat confident, pretty neutral, haven't really thought much about it, somewhat unconfident, or very unconfident? Or if you don't have a resume currently, let us know if you don't have one yet. So Brian, can you see this on your screen?
Yeah, I can, and I'm probably somewhere in that neutral to slightly uncomfortable with it because I haven't updated mine in about a year.
So we've got about 88, 90 participants so far.
This is a confident group.
That is good. Hopefully, after your presentation, they'll see, even though they're somewhat confident, our goal is to move everyone to be able to feel very confident about their resumes after the tips that you provide them, after implementing that.
I hope so, and I hope everybody takes advantage of the resources that they have at their own universities too. The resources available are usually very, very helpful, and I know when I was a student, I didn't take full advantage of them like I should have.
That's a great tip. So we've got almost 300 participants joining us tonight live. We also have probably another 120 or so that are going to watch the recorded session of this. We had 2 weeks off for spring break. We're just coming back from the spring break that we gave them, but some students are having their spring break this week, so we've been getting emails from them. But yeah, so your presentation is going to be seen by about at least 400 students, if not more.
This is a great program from everything I've heard, and I hadn't really thought about that, but when you're dealing with students across several hundred universities, you have a wide range of spring breaks, don't you?
Definitely. Yeah, we took a poll of that, and so we tried to accommodate the majority of spring breaks, and I think we did a pretty good job. I mean, having 300 here tonight. So, all right, well, about 200 have actually contributed. So the rest of you, I'll actually leave this open, not on screen here, but I'll leave it open in the background. And if you have not had a chance to submit your response, you can go ahead and do that now or do that during the session. For now, I'm going to go ahead and hop on over to your presentation, Brian. You feel free to just let me know whenever you're ready to switch over to the next slide.
Sure.
And I'll
And
do
if
that
you
for
have any points you want to bring up as the slides come along, jump in.
Okay, I appreciate that. And we will have an opportunity for Q&A after your session. We've got Jessica from our team monitoring the chat, and if a question comes up while you're presenting, we might stop and do a little bit of question during the actual presentation. But let's go ahead and get started.
Sure, and my plan is to go through the slides a little quicker. I'm not going to read all the slides to everybody because I know you'll have time to look at them later. And then I'll try and leave as much time as possible for Q&A at the end too.
All right, sounds great. Well, your slides are currently up, so we
All
can
right.
get started.
And this is a brilliant title I came up with this morning, which basically what I did is I borrowed 3 different other presentations. One was about resumes, one was about interviews, and then there was a few slides from a manager in industry who talked a little bit about workplace survival. So go ahead and go to the next one. So we will hit the resume development first, and there's a bunch of slides on resume development. It goes into a little bit of detail, and I'll probably not cover every point in all those slides. And then we'll spend a lot of time talking about interviews, and I imagine there'll be questions about that because that's one of the scariest things is having to do that interview. And then we'll finish up with Q&A. Next slide. All right, I got this from a former colleague of mine, Anita Todd, and she really loved this particular cartoon. And a resume really can make the difference between getting, and keep in mind when you're putting a resume together, the only goal, it's not how many eyeballs look at it, it's how many people will give you an interview. What you want is an interview at the end of this. All right, next slide. So the purpose is to attract attention, to create interest, to communicate your accomplishments and your skills, and absolutely provoke action and get that interview. Okay, go ahead, next slide. I wanted to start out right at the top at a high level, saying there are 5 C's of resume production. You want it to be clean. You want the appearance to be attractive. You want to be concise. This is not a document where you show that you are Shakespeare and you can write long, convoluted sentences. You want to be short and to the point. You definitely want to go through and have at least 2 or 3 other people take a look at it because you don't want to leave any typos or mistakes of any kind on there because this is reflecting you. Also, we're talking about resumes for science and engineering people. So you want to be concrete, you want to be specific, you want to use numbers and quantify things when possible. And the other thing you want to do is remember, this is a little bit of a sales document. So where in life you might be self-deprecating and give credit to the group and the team, this is the place where it is okay to take credit for what was done for yourself. You're not lying, but just make sure you're taking credit for the things you can take credit for. And another reason why it's kind of really important to have a clean, simple layout and be concise is that the first test your resume has to do is it has to separate you from the stack of 200 other resumes that may be on the desk of that person. So your resume has to be easy to find the key points that manager is looking for so that they can, in 15, 20, 30 seconds, decide, I'm going to take a deeper look at that resume. And you don't end up in the pile that doesn't get a very close look. All right, next slide.
Yeah, I was also going to add, in terms of crediting yourself in terms of what you've done, I mean, the LaSpace Academy, participating in something like this and the PDRs that you do is definitely, you want to include things like that.
Yeah, the non-standard coursework and the clubs and activities that you're involved in are very important to employers, because that allows them to get a feel for what your interpersonal skills are like, what your quote leadership skills are, and just how you work in groups. They can't tell that just from the resume, so they need to see those sorts of things to have an idea that you're going to be able to get along with others in the workplace. Next slide. So the order of items on a resume. The reason the order of items is important is to make life easy on the reader. So you get past that 30-second or 1-minute text. They can find everything they're looking for. And typically, you've got your name up there, you've got the heading and contact information at the top, and then you go right down the list: education, experience, skills and qualifications, and then there's some optional categories where you can talk about those extracurricular activities you had or special interests and that sort of thing. Go ahead.
Whoops. There we go.
So I am not a big fan of putting job objectives at the top of a resume, particularly if it's for an internship or a co-op, because it's not new information. If you're applying for an internship, what do you want? You want to get an internship. So putting a specific job objective up there, I don't think adds value to your resume. But when you are going to do that, we'll give you some tips about how to make it very specific and don't make it very flowery. Achievements, scholarships, awards, and outside activities are definitely a category you want to put on your resume if you've done those things. You can also put personal interests down there if you've got space for it. Talk a little bit about your background, but those things would be less important than previous jobs, previous experience, previous things that will speak to your ability to work, to function in a group in that work environment. And what you're looking for in a resume is something that is one, no more than 2 pages. So you want to really be as concise as possible. All right, next slide. So the heading, make it stand out. Your name should be the biggest thing on there so they know who you are and how they can contact you. Oh, a good one. I had a student who had a very nice resume, and his email address was deathbringer429@gmail.com or something like that. Let me ask you, if you're looking through a stack of resumes, do you really want to bring Deathbringer into your local work group to work with you in the office? Make sure your email address is professional. Use your school email address or something else that looks professional.
How many of you are going back to your resumes right now, changing the email address? I wonder. Just kidding.
I thought it was funny. I was teaching a class of about 110 students, and I had that resume and was going through the resumes that had been turned into me the previous week. And I said this: show of hands, who would offer an interview to someone with the email Deathbringer? And one person raised his hand, and I said, this is your resume, right? Yeah, it was his resume. All right, moving on. So here's a couple examples of the way you can lay out your name and your email address and that sort of thing. Go ahead to the next slide. And the way these slides were set up, we talk about the sections, and then there's some examples, and I might not go into all of them. Now, here, if you are going to put that objective, and I do not think it's needed on co-op or internship resumes, and if you are going to include it, it needs to be specific, so it's probably targeted, and you have to write one for each individual, employer that you're applying to. So you want it to be brief, direct, and specific, and you just want to stay away from the flowery objectives. Go ahead to the next slide, and I think there's a couple of examples. So here you'd say, okay, to find a cooperative education position in mechanical engineering starting in January 2019. This is why I don't think objectives are useful. If you're applying for an internship in the spring of 2019, they already know this. So you haven't really added anything. You could say with an interest in the automotive industry in the Pittsburgh area, if you're applying specifically to an automotive company in the Pittsburgh area, for example. Try to just stay away from the flowery stuff. I want to apply my chemistry skills to a position with a progressive company where I can contribute to the growth and development of my coworkers and all that. That's too much. And it doesn't really add value. Go ahead to the next slide.
Hey, Brian, so before we move on, actually, Jonah in the chat has a question in terms of what's a flowery. So he was like, what's wrong with flowery? And he, honest question he's asking.
Yeah. Think about it like this. You need to know your audience whenever you are communicating with them, whether it's in a resume or verbally or whatever. And what you know is you're applying for, and I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, that I'm talking to a STEM crowd here, engineering and science students. You're going to be applying for jobs where the HR department may not be engineers and scientists, but the end hiring manager is. And what we care about as STEM professionals is the facts and just the facts. I know whenever I see a resume that has some fancy stuff on there that really isn't provable, I'm like, yeah, right. And so I set it aside and don't pay attention to it. So it's not like flowery is going to kill you, but it's not adding value. And remember, part of what you do as an engineer or a scientist is you convey information effectively and clearly. So this resume is your one and only example to prove to them you know how to communicate effectively and clearly, and you can make a clear picture of what you want without a lot of extra words needed. Now, resumes and interviewing are an art, not a science, so you may have people that like a little more flowery than me, but I'm telling you, when you're tailoring it to the STEM field, be a little less flowery than maybe the average advice would be. That answer the question enough?
I think so. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide.
All right, so in the education section, you want to put the degree you're going for or you have just achieved. Don't abbreviate the major, but you can put BS instead of Bachelor of Science. You can do that sort of thing. And throughout a resume, be careful when you use acronyms, because step back and think, okay, would everyone in my field know what that acronym means? And if not, you're going to have to go ahead and spell it out, because you don't want a key person looking at your resume and not understanding what something is. You want to put the university you're at, city and state, expected graduation date is an important. These pieces of information are the kinds of things you want to have in that section. Go ahead. If you changed okay, I saw a question about a change of major, and that's a good one. If you changed your major at some point, maybe you changed your school, that's all right if you've got more than one school on your resume. And if you took a significant number of credits at that other school, go ahead and put that down. That actually is fodder for the interview later, where they can say, hey, what made you change your major from A to B? And you can then have an answer prepared for that shows how you're evolving in your thinking and you're excited about this new major you're taking right now. Okay. You can include the grade point average. You definitely want to. If I see a resume on it without a grade point average, I have a tendency to think that that's bad news. So if you can, I recommend you put the grade point average on there. I think that hopefully you have enough stuff to talk about that you have a separate category for activities and awards. But if not, you can put it in here if it's just a few things and it's associated with the university. You might want to point out some relevant courses that would be important to the particular internship or the job you're applying for. Don't forget any special training. Courses like this one you're taking right now are kind of a nice to pull out and highlight in your background. High school information, that will fall off as you have more stuff on the university side. Next slide.
I see a question in the chat relating to community college students. So Annie's asking, for community college students who get an associate's degree before a bachelor's degree, is there any point to include both of them on the resume or just the actual bachelor's degree?
I actually like seeing the associate degree on there. I think that there might be some people that would give the advice the other way, but I'm going to tell you, I like to see it on there. I have a student that's interning for me right now in the Space Station Program Science Office here at JSC, and she has just finished her associates and is headed off to, basically she's a junior now, working on a biology degree. So I think that it's absolutely fine to have that on here. I think that it's a couple of decades past when two-year schools had a stigma of not being good enough anymore. I think that community college and an associate's degree is a very positive thing. Heck yeah. All right.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide. Thank you.
All right, and here's some examples. I like the second example myself. It's just very easy to read. However you set up the resume, don't be afraid. You don't have to have a lot of white space in there to make it easy to read. You can have a very dense set of material, but organize it in a way that the eyes can follow to the main points. If I'm looking at a resume, I want to check the major, I want to check the GPA, make sure I know the school's a good school. Then I'm looking at the relevant courses, and then I'm looking down into your work background. So if I can quickly move my eyes across the page and see that information I'm looking for, probably subconsciously, you've given me a good feeling right off the bat because you're making my life as the reader of this resume easy. And that's really what you want to focus on when you're putting your resume together. Make it as easy on the eyes as possible. Next slide. Excuse me. So for experience, you want to do this basically in reverse chronological order from the most recent on down. There are rare instances where you might put the most relevant stuff first and then put some other things below that. But, I worked on resumes for about 1,000 students when I was at university, and I can't recall a case where that was the way to go. So you're going from the most recent job back in time. You've got the company name and location, your job title, your responsibilities, and all the basic stuff. And what you're trying to do here is paint a picture that is clear in somebody else's mind. If you use some vague words like, you worked in production. Well, I don't know what production is. Can you be a little clearer about exactly what you did and what were your responsibilities? Because what I'm looking to find out is if your experience is relevant to my internship. The things you don't include. We're not talking about salary. Don't put your salary from past internship. That might lose you something. That might lose you an internship at NASA where we can't pay you as much as some private industry, for example. You don't want to talk about problems and issues. Keep everything positive. Okay. And they've put the note down here. Reasons why you left or were fired. No, that's not something we put on the resume.
In reference to experience, somebody's asking in the chat, I kind of lost it for a bit, but Parisa is asking, in terms of all the previous jobs that they've had, how many is too many to list, and how long should a resume on average be?
You want your resume, and I've had colleagues, particularly for students getting internships, that say the resume has to be 1 page. I don't think so, but it really, really, really shouldn't be 2 pages. So part of what you're doing to make my life easier as the reader is citing at what point you stop. So if you've had 6 jobs since you were, a freshman in high school. And that's going to end up taking so much space that you don't have a chance to talk about other things that are going to be interesting. Maybe you cut off the last few of those jobs. But err on the side of having more than not. One thing students need to understand, and I had to keep explaining to students back in the day, is if you grew up on a farm and you had chores on a daily basis, that is the equivalent of a pretty good solid job, particularly if you're going into engineering. That's hands-on, getting your hands dirty with tools kind of work, and the engineering people love that. So don't think that your job at McDonald's isn't important, or your job, babysitting is not important enough to put on there. Only drop it off if you need the space.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide. Yeah, all experience is relevant. Yeah, retail, restaurant, because what you're showing with that experience is you can work in a fast-paced environment, you can work with a group of people, you've got interpersonal skills, you can get along with others. And so restaurant work shows that, camp counselor work shows that. That's what babysitting shows, right? You were trusted by moms with their kids. That's important for an employer to know. But whenever you're putting that experience on there, paint that clear picture. You use the descriptive adjectives. And again, don't feel you have to write sentences that your AP English professor would have approved of. These can be phrases, these can be, partial sentences. You just want to use short phrases that paint that clear picture of what you did. And again, because we're talking about STEM people, if you can talk about how you save somebody 50% on cost, and the other thing is too, maybe you worked at McDonald's in a small town and there were like 5 people that came in during your shift. If the average shift you worked pulled in some relatively large, significant number, like $3,000 worth of business, $10,000 worth of business, put that number in there, because it gives me, as the reader of your resume, an idea that you were really busy during that time. So any way you can put numbers to things that will give you a positive light, you want to go ahead and do that. And the action verbs are really important, tested and stocked and all the others you can come up with. We have a tendency to get in the passive voice when we're talking about ourselves, as a rule. I know I do. And you want to constantly look at what you've written down and say, is this as active as it could be? And when you use active verbs, you tend to be able to use fewer words. And so everything gets a little more concise. It's a little easier to read. We'll go ahead to the next slide.
Oh, this is the next slide after your hints.
All right.
Showing the examples.
So here's some examples. I got interested in reading all the comments that are coming across on the bottom.
Yeah, and by the way, feel free. I mean, if you see a question that pops up there, you can definitely
volunteer work. By the way, work is work. Definitely, volunteer work can count. That's why I encourage several of the people students that I had, put your farm down and write it up as if it was a job, because you might have gotten allowance or you might not have. It's something you did to help your family keep the farm running. So yeah, absolutely, volunteer work is a big thing. You can pull volunteer work out as a separate category if you want. I also don't have a problem with leaving it in there just in the reverse chronological order. So these are just a couple of examples of the way you can do that. Accurately manage more than 10,000 in cash and receipts each day. That gives me an idea of both what you did. You greeted customers, you stocked shelves, you priced the merchandise, and you managed the returns and the exchanges, and that's a lot of money that you were entrusted with on a regular basis. So that's a good thing. All right, next slide.
So at what point, Brian, do they shift from using a resume versus a CV? So I'm seeing Ashley's asking, would it be better to use a CV if we have a lot of work experience? Or I think in general, what would you recommend for students that are just getting out of college?
I think if you're just getting out of college, that trying to use the resume format and sticking to a couple of pages is going to, if that reader, if that manager or that HR person is looking through 50 people who have applied for that position, keeping to that more standard format where they can find your information easier gives you an increased odds, in my opinion, of making it through that first quick look and getting a serious look at your resume from top to bottom. Now, but that's a judgment call. If there's so much good stuff that's being cut out for you to force yourself into that 1 or 2 page format, that's when you got to switch over to a CV. And this is again what I'm telling you, most of you all have some great support at your universities. And so you can have them look at your specific case and give you their opinion. And keep in mind, it's their opinion. What I'm telling you is my opinion. I have some experience directly in helping students get hired into engineering and science positions. So my advice may be a little more targeted for you than people at the university that are just helping all the students across all of the university majors. So understand where they're coming from when they're giving their advice, and then you got to make a judgment call.
Okay, moving on to the next slide.
And I just see where somebody said, "Hey, can we send you your resume to look at?" And my first thought is yes, but there's 400 of you, and I don't have time to look at 400 resumes. Okay, skills, achievements, and activities. So you definitely want to highlight any specific skills that you've got, and you know, I will admit that I was a professor doing this 10 years ago, and technology changes relatively quickly. But I still think it's important not to overlook the fact that you've got to demonstrate that you can do Excel, Word, PowerPoint, all the basics. You don't have to spend a lot of time or space on your resume, but don't leave them out and assume that people will assume you know how to do that. Put the basics down there as well as any other technical skills that will separate you a little more. Foreign languages are big. There's a lot of companies. I mean, the world is getting smaller and smaller. I look for foreign language where I am with the International Space Station, because if the students can sit in some of these meetings, and I'm having meetings with Japanese, Russians, Europeans, Canadians. So it's helpful to have that capability. Public speaking, if you've done any public speaking, that's a really big thing to highlight in some way on your resume, because that, I believe that whenever they do the surveys around the country, the most terrifying thing is speaking in front of people. So if you can show you've done that and got some experience with it, and you may not be the most comfortable person in the world at it, but you're not afraid to do it, that sets you apart from everybody else. Any professional memberships, your student organizations for mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, societies for physics, biology, geosciences, all those things are good things to make sure that are listed there. That might make a personal connection with the person that's looking at the resume. Well, Russian is certainly very valuable. Of course, I work within the U.S. government, so I can't work with anyone from China, so Mandarin isn't going to help me a whole lot. All right, so here's some examples. You can talk about the computer skills. Some of these are a little bit old, but you get the idea. And activities, special skills, fluent in Spanish, strong written communication skills. All right, here's that flowery stuff. Enjoy public speaking and presenting, but I don't think that's too much. I think that about that level of flowery is as far as you want to go. All right. Next slide.
These are the examples, by the way, to the skills and achievements that you talked about. So next up is references. Go ahead.
So references, you want to have that list of references available. You do not want to send it out with your resume for typically it's not asked for in internships until after they will request it after the fact. So you want it to be available upon request. If you're applying for something and they ask for it, then obviously include it in there. And these are good recommendations. As much as possible, if you have worked, get one professional recommendation, even if it's not directly in the field that you're going for. It's still someone that can vouch for you in a work environment. Don't make it all academic or all one way or the other, in other words. All right, next slide. All right, things you never have to include on a resume. I'm not going to read all of these things. I actually highlighted the bottom two as being really, really bad. Don't ever do that. But you don't have to whatever your gender, whatever your religion, whatever your marital status, that is not necessary to put on there. You definitely don't have to put a photograph on there. All right, next slide. All right, and I put this slide in here twice because it's important. Just, we've talked about the details, and it's easy to get buried in the details of what should I put in and what shouldn't I put in, but make sure you're constantly stepping back and looking at a high level, or bring in a friend or a parent, or make use of those resources you have at the university to look over your resume. Make sure it's clean, concise, correct, concrete, and you're giving yourself as much credit as you can. Next slide. So gather all the information. This is not a first-person account of your life. This is not what I did on my summer vacation, so you're not using I, me, and my. Use the phrases and the action verbs. You will not be able to eliminate all errors. I guarantee that. So you need eyeballs other than yours on it, because by the time you've gone over your resume 3 or 4 times, you are seeing what you want to be on there, not what's actually on there. And I have a great example of this, which is, well, let's just say I had a student who worked in the factory 3rd shift, so it was shift work, and she wanted to make a statement that basically said that she had never missed a regularly scheduled shift. She had never been sick, never missed. She was always there. Problem is, she left the letter F out of the word shift. And now that sentence means something completely different. So just be careful and have other people take a look at it, because you're writing the word shift. And so when you look at it with your own eyes, you stick the F in there. And spell check's not going to help you with things like that. All right, make sure that it's be kind to the reader. Make sure you focus on your accomplishments. Edit and re-edit that darn thing. And use the space on the page wisely. Don't feel like you have to have a lot of white. I mean, I've seen resumes with 2-inch margins on either side, and that's not necessary. You can use the full layout of the page if you're organized, so that it's easy on the eyes, and I know where education is, and I know where employment is, and that sort of stuff. Then I can see that stuff. So you can get a lot of information. I had students every year that would come to me saying their resume had to be 3 pages. And there was not one time that I couldn't get those 3 pages down to, most of the time, 1 page, and still have the core facts that were on those 3 pages to start with. Just make good use of the page. Your chance to show how organized you can be and how clearly you can communicate. All right.
I see a question in the chat before we transition to don'ts related. John says he's got a point of confusion for him. He's got several references who are willing to write him a reference letter. Is he supposed to ask them to send a copy of the letter so he can submit it with all his paperwork, or should he include their name and contact info for the employer to contact them? What's your preference?
Typically, okay, let's talk in the world of internships and co-op. Typically, if it's an online system where you've had to cut and paste these parts of a resume and put it into an online system, then typically they have a process of you putting in the email address of that reference, and then they will email them and ask them to directly put a couple of paragraphs email back to them. Usually just having the name and having, and making sure you let them know you're going to use them and they've given you the green light to be a reference for you, it is enough. When you're starting out here. If you're using one of those systems, or the company has specifically asked for letters of reference, then go and get them.
Okay.
All right, next slide.
So now the resume don'ts.
Yeah, don't be too wordy. Try very hard not to be negative, because we all get that way in a heartbeat. And part of the being negative is not giving yourself credit for all the things you did, because I know in every situation I can go back and immediately think the things I could have done better. The resume is not the place to let any of that angst leak out. Try not to mix your formats. Stick with one consistent style. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of templates out there, and don't use the templates, but look at them so that you get an idea of how you can organize things. Don't let someone else prepare your resume. You're the best advocate for yourself. And definitely make sure 2 or 3 eyeballs have seen it and get any errors out of that. All right, moving on. Oh, let's talk about the interview. I like these. I would be more like the first one here. You know, my biggest weakness is listening. And I definitely would not ever prepare a dance. Okay, moving on. So take a deep breath. The interview is actually, particularly if you're a student going for an interview for an internship, the employer is in your corner. They want you to do well. They understand this is a learning experience. They understand that you have not done 50 million interviews before, so they do not expect you to be perfect. But stay in the present, be observant, watch their reactions, follow their lead. Students who prepare for interviews end up landing the best jobs. That is a direct quote from Georgia Tech. They love that. They love that phrase. Remember, you are interviewing them as well. This is something that you get so nervous about, presenting yourself well to the company. Don't forget, you're there to figure out if this company is a place you want to spend some time at. So the interview goes both ways. All right, next slide. So when you're in this situation, remember the organization has some goals. And if you help them achieve their goals, they're going to like you better for it. So they want to get to know you. They want to learn about your abilities and your talents and your personality. So let them see your personality a little bit. Share some they want to share some of their expertise with you, particularly if we're talking internships and co-op. They know you're a student and they want to help further you along in your career, just as people did for them when they were students. So they want to help you understand who they are. They're very excited about their company and they want to explain that to you. They're there to help guide you. But in the end, they're looking to see if your knowledge and skills and abilities and your personality and thought processes will fit in their organization and be good for their company. All right, next slide. So your intent, same kind of thing. You want to become acquainted with the organization. You want to figure out if the way the organization is structured and thinks and acts fits with your personality. You want to become more familiar with their goals and priorities, understand how they will utilize you as an intern or as a fresh out hire if you're just graduating. And then you want to present yourself as a capable and worthy student and learn as much as possible about your career field when you're on that internship, if it's an internship you're going for. Okay, next slide. So a couple of tips. And I actually sent a Word document that has a lot of material from these slides and some additional material in it, and hopefully they can make that available to you.
Yeah, we'll be posting that in the forums for everyone.
Yeah. This is a little bit like that email address. Don't forget that if you put your phone number out there, an employer is going to call you. So when's the last time you actually listened to your own message on your voicemail? Is it something that you did to amuse your friends maybe 2 or 3 years ago? I remember calling a student who had a very high GPA, but he wasn't getting any jobs, and I called him looking for him, and his voicemail, he got me. It was really good. It said, hello, and then paused long enough for me to start talking, and it said, ha, gotcha, this is a voicemail. It was good. Definitely not what you want to have on your voicemail if your resume is out there and there are potential employers calling you. So skip the music. Don't be sarcastic. Just be mature and straightforward and professional and have a lovely voicemail message. Okay. Oh, and by the way, when you do get that message, write everything down so you don't forget it. Because I have lost a message or two in my lifetime, and you will too, I guarantee it. All right, next tip. Prior to the interview, and there's several slides on this, research the organization. Remember, there's a reason Georgia Tech likes to say the prepared student is the one that gets the best offers. The best way to make a great impression with those that are interviewing you is to give the impression you actually went to the trouble of learning about their company and the details of what they do before you sat down and had a conversation with them. There is no single thing you can do that's more impressive. So definitely take the time to look up what you can about the company and what past interns have done, what past people, anything you can that will give you a chance to tailor some good questions to be able to ask them later on. Because at some point in the interview, they're going to say, "You have any questions for me?" And having no questions is you want to have some questions. You want to be able to show that you're enthusiastic and interested in the position. Not having any questions gives the impression you're not that interested. So again, take advantage of your school's resources and career centers as much as possible. I firmly believe that videotaped mock interviews are the way to go. Do them, particularly if you are afraid of interviewing. Get that fear out of your system in a safe environment in your career resources center with somebody who's doing a mock interview with you. I instituted those for all of my students, and I don't have specific numbers, but it did much better the next year in getting and nailing jobs. I got a lot of feedback from the employers that they were very impressed with the students once we started doing that for every student we had.
Hey, Brian, so speaking of mock interviews, we would be open to maybe, if we have time, have one of these students do a little quick mock interview with you. That's possible with this platform that we're on. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, with everything that's gone on today, it probably wouldn't be my best interview, but we can see what we can do.
No, that's fine. Just thought I'd put it out there. Next, I'm going to next slide.
All right, and again, this is just being prepared. Collect your thoughts about yourself. Think about what, if you're one of those people that is always putting yourself down, then think about what your friends and your parents say that are your strong points, and then think about how you can highlight those. All right, you have you have strengths, you have weaknesses. You want to emphasize your strengths. I want to not talk about your weaknesses right now in the interview. So work experience, wherever you can tie your past experiences to, once you've done your homework, what this job or this internship is about. That is a very good thing to do. Talking about specific classes, rehearsing, practicing. Do it with a friend. Do it by yourself in a mirror. Whatever works for you, rehearse and prepare your thoughts. Write down some notes. Now, you don't want to be looking at the notes directly while you're talking to them, but if you've written, I have to do this for technical presentations sometimes. Go ahead and write out a bunch of notes, and I'll use those as I sort of rehearse. And I found if I rehearse 5 or 10 times, then I go out and I usually nail the presentation just fine. If I only rehearse once or twice, sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not. You don't want to have a bad interview. All right, write down the questions you have for the employer, and it's okay even to look, because that also will show you prepared. If they notice you have a sheet of questions that you've already pre-prepared, that's a positive. So you can go ahead and do that. And you can take a few notes in the interview, and don't be put off if they're writing notes while you're talking, because they will be interviewing a lot of different students, a lot of different potential hirees, and if they don't take notes, everyone will blend together. So understand in the interview process, there's going to be some awkward pauses while people are writing notes. And don't be afraid, by the way, to pause and think before you answer. That is not a negative, that's a positive. Next slide. And I saw that go on. Take StrengthsFinders tests. And I think it's good to know your personality type. Take those personality Myers-Briggs type tests. Know the way you think. And to be honest, the best employer who came regularly to interview my students, she never missed in hiring someone that fit in her organization well. And she basically asked interview questions that let her know what the Myers-Briggs personality type was of the students. And she had already decided, based on what their resume said, that they were smart enough and had the skills that they needed. So she was interviewing purely to see what personality types were and whether she thought student A would fit with supervisor B back at her company. And she never missed. She didn't pick on GPA, she picked on the personality types. All right. Don't risk being late or arrive 15 minutes early. These are not my, I am not the one to give you dress and clothing advice. I am an engineer. I am not a fashion icon. but you want to dress professionally. I would always have one of my female colleagues come in and talk to female students when I was running the co-op program so that they could explain the difference between dressing up for a social activity and dressing up for a professional activity. So, you want to be professional in your dress. Bring copies of your resume. Be neat and well groomed. Don't chew gum, particularly if you're nervous, because you're going to be chewing a mile a minute and that's distracting. You can bring notes, bring the job description, a list of questions. This is a very good list of things that you can do, and really the tips that are in here are excellent. Do you have to shave your beard? Right now, beards are in. Your beard needs to be neat and trimmed. And as you're researching the company, I would say back in the day, Procter & Gamble was a very straight-laced organization in Cincinnati, because I was at the University of Cincinnati. You needed to be in a suit and a tie and clean shaven to maximize your chances with Procter & Gamble. Other companies, maybe not so much. So in your research, look at the personality of the company. All right, next slide. Really important, by the way, to treat secretaries and those support people well, even after you get the job, because they're the ones that make your job work. But it's really important in interviews, and I've had young people make that mistake where they were being very polite to the interviewee and less nice to others. When you get out of your car and head into the interview has started. Be nice to everybody. You want to make eye contact as much. It's amazing what eye contact and a consistent smile will do for people liking you. Give a firm handshake. Follow those cues. Like I said, be observant, pay attention to what they're doing. Try very hard. This is hard for me because I'm always organizing the next set of thoughts I want to say. You need to be in the present, listen to the question, observe, then go ahead and take that pause to organize your thoughts. And if you've practiced ahead of time, that pause won't be too long because you've come up with a bunch of stories and examples that can show your strengths. And so you've now listened carefully to the question, and now you're just spending 5 or 10 seconds thinking, what's the best story I want to use to answer that question? Try very hard not to get into the negative. And exhibit enthusiasm. Everybody enjoys working with people who are enthusiastic and happy to be there. So you be attentive, be interested, and exhibit enthusiasm.
So Brian, we've got a couple questions in the chat regarding disabilities. So if is it appropriate to disclose those disabilities, mention them during the interview? Calvin says if you have autism spectrum disorder, should you fake eye contact? It's challenging for some people because of disorders.
At the beginning of the interview, there's that opportunity to show your personality, and typically most interviewers are going to start with some general chatty stuff just to ease into it, make you relaxed, get that going. The story of how you maybe have some of those autism and how you're working with that to be the best engineer, the best scientist you can be. That might be a time to be able to bring that up in a positive way early on, and that way they will understand and not misinterpret you're not making as much eye contact as somebody else might, and that might turn into a positive for you.
Thank you.
And by the way, well, that's true until you're too close. Somebody said, I bet if you stare at their nose, they'll never notice. Depends on how far away you are. Okay, be yourself. This is really the most important thing. Don't pretend. Don't be somebody you're not. That takes too much mental energy on your part to keep that act up the whole time. And then if you get the internship or the job, you got to keep that up for the rest of your life. It's not either. Be yourself. Just be the best version of yourself you can be in that interview. All right, be positive. And eye contact is important if you can do that. That does not mean stare for 30 minutes in a 30-minute interview. Just make eye contact when you think of it. And listen. Don't get so wrapped up. That's the biggest mistake we all make, particularly when we haven't done it in a long time, because we're wrapped up in formulating our responses, and so we don't listen. All right, next slide. Speak clearly and audibly. Speaking of which, there are some noises. I'm sitting outside in the backyard, so if there's some noises get disturbing, let me know. Share your goals and interests. Again, they're trying to get to know you. Ask questions, try to understand the organizations, and express your appreciation at the end. All right, go on to the next slide. Here's the most amazing thing. If you send a thank you email, which is not hard, you probably are ahead of 80% of the other people that did the interview who didn't bother to do that. It's amazing how many of us don't do that. You know, send a thank you. And whatever they've requested, whether it's transcripts or if they wanted those references and you didn't have them, you needed to send them later. Make sure you promptly take care of whatever requests they have. Get your action items done. And then be ready to wait, because they've got a lot of other things going on. They've got a lot of other people to interview. And for a lot of my students, when I was doing this in academia, it was the first time that basically the world didn't revolve around them. So they were asking me within 2 or 3 days, hey, I haven't heard anything. No, it's not going to happen in days. It may take weeks. So be ready to be patient.
Yeah, somebody asked about that earlier in terms of following up, you know, and the thank you email, I saw that in the chat that somebody suggested. That was great. So if in these let's say 2-3 weeks go by, then what is your suggestion or recommendation on following up at that point?
You got to go by feel, and it's kind of important to ask them what they think the timeline of the process is going to be there. It doesn't hurt to ask gently in the interview how long the process is going to be, and then use that as a guide. If they said it might be a couple of weeks, then wait 2 or 3 weeks before you send an email.
So then it's okay for them to ask, like you said, gently, in terms of when will you be making a decision? Or
it's understandable. To me, it shows a little bit of enthusiasm. Hey, I'm really interested in this. I'm kind of excited about it. So as long as you're very gentle and very polite in the way you're asking, yeah.
Sounds great.
And you all are going to see my background move because I'm going to move away from the back wall.
I thought I heard some seagulls a while ago. I grew up on the Gulf in Texas, so sounded like home.
There's a couple of young kids in just on the other side of the fence, and they're having fun. All right, now you all have seen my backyard. All right, so make use of the resources available at your school over and over again. If you're offered the internship, choose to accept it, write a thank you, and confirm all the details so that you don't make any mistakes that way. If it's an internship and there's some family commitment, if your sister's getting married or your brother's, whatever is going on, make sure that everybody early on knows that. I know for me, I'm looking for, when I make an internship offer, you need to be here for the 15 weeks of the internship, and I've told you when it starts and I've told you when it ends. Don't tell me halfway through that you have a commitment. I need to know that up front. That needs to be part of my hiring decision. If you get, the last thing in this slide here about tactfully asking for feedback, it's really important to get that feedback, and it's really, really hard to get employers to give it to you because they don't want to open themselves up to in any way. Their human resources and their lawyers have told them, don't say anything that could open you up to, having someone feel like they didn't get fairly considered. So they're going to be very tentative about that. But if you are a student and you're going for an internship, it is an opportunity because they're considering themselves being a little bit of a teacher and that this is the first time through. So you might be able to get some feedback from them if you're very tactful about it. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, behavior-based interview questions. That's why you want to do mock interviews, because it's really hard to come up with those stories that will, when when you get hit with that question, there's going to be some questions in the next few slides for those of you that don't know what behavior-based interview questions are. But hey, tell me about a situation where you had to work with someone that was very difficult to get along with, and how did you handle that? That would be a behavior-based interview type question. What would you consider your greatest strength? What do you consider your greatest weakness? Those are fun questions to answer. So that's why it's good to have prepared and identified a handful of examples that you can use in the past that will answer those questions in a way that shines the most positive light on you that you can. So you want to try and think about examples that will hit some of those fairly common behavior-based questions, and then you can tailor, if you have those in your back pocket, you can answer most of those questions relatively easily, or at least with the least amount of stress possible. So I really liked the advice here where half of your examples can be very positive and the other half could be a situation that started out rough, and then you can talk about how you made mid-course corrections, you changed the way you did something or did things or interacted with someone and sort of made the best of the situation in the end. Vary your examples as much as you can and try to use the most recent examples that you can. All right, next slide.
So before we move to the next slide, one other question. So Justin's asking in terms of, I think he's asking about receiving feedback about the interview. If not selected for a position, is it appropriate or to ask if there's any areas that they could improve on when they apply again or interview again? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a very delicate thing, and you have to be very, very careful about it. And you can ask once, and I wouldn't suggest if you didn't get a response out of that you ask a second time. But asking in just that way is a good way to go. You're not saying, hey, why didn't you pick me? You're saying, hey, what areas could I improve in my interview? So you're making it a positive question and not a negative question.
Good, thanks.
Okay, so when you're coming up with these stories, I like the STAR sort of memorization acronym. You want to set the situation, let the interviewers know what the context was, what the goals were, what task was involved, and then what action you took. And here's what we all forget to do. We spend a lot of time talking about the situation, and then we sort of run out of steam when we're talking about the result. Oh yeah, and it all worked out well in the end. Make sure that you spend some time talking about the positive outcome that came out of it. You want to end on a positive note with every story. Next slide. And it's really hard to in words put down an example, but here's a couple of attempts here just to give you an idea of the kinds of stories that we're thinking about. But really, there's 400 of you, in the class. There's going to be 400 sets of stories that are all completely unique. Next slide. So the fun questions. What's your biggest weakness? And so the next few slides really just kind of give some tips of how you can handle that. So here's one. When someone says, "What's your biggest weakness?" Here's what you don't do. Tell them point blank what your biggest weakness is. You always want to have in your back pocket a weakness that is sort of two sides of a coin, and you can work the conversation around to show there's a strength in that weakness if you do it. And you always want to make sure whatever weakness you've selected, that you can talk about the ways you're working to overcome it. I'm such a perfectionist that I just work myself to the bone. So I'm trying, I'm always trying to do this and that. Or, I'm a procrastinator. Honestly, I am a procrastinator and I'm working on time management courses, that kind of thing. What other companies are you applying to? That's something you don't, most professional interviewers are not going to ask you that question, but that's them fishing to see really how quickly they may have to turn something around. And that's kind of a delicate situation. You want to be vague and just say, hey, I'm pursuing a lot of opportunities right now. Okay, next slide. So when they're asking where you want to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, think about what kind of goals you could have that really are goals you want to get to, but that that are relatable to the employer, that the employer could see themselves helping you reach. You know, if you say you want to be the next, you know, movie star and you're applying for mechanical engineering jobs, that's irrelevant. Bad example. Want to make sure whatever it is you're trying to do, somehow, you know, give the company that feeling that not only are you saying you're enthusiastic, but they could really be a part of your advancement in your career, and it makes sense. So the what if questions, or how would you handle a certain situation? The advice here is, keep in mind, they're not looking all the time for the exact solution you came up with. They're just trying to figure out how you think and how you problem solve. So as you come up with stories to answer those kinds of questions, try and be helpful to them and make sure that they illustrate the way you think through situations. Next slide. So what's your greatest strength? When I read this, it reminded me of something I had forgotten about. Just don't give a list of your strengths. I'm really great at X, Y, and Z. But this is an opportunity for you to tease them a little bit and say, hey, you know, in preparing for this interview and researching you all, you know, there were several things that you all have going on that I'm very interested in. And I think these strengths actually fall in line to helping you achieve these goals or do this job that I'm hopefully going to get. So try and make your strengths relevant to the employer. Next slide. Oh, and there are times when employers, they'll have puzzles and things that they want to give everyone the same. They're really just looking to see how you problem solve. So don't be overly concerned about whether you get the answer right. They're looking for how you think. Next slide. Oh, had an employer come, GE aircraft engine, General Electric aircraft engine came, and was a mid-level manager, and she talked to us for a while about her perspective sitting on the other side of the table interviewing students. And so she had a couple of slides. One of them involved resumes, and I thought the points that were really relevant I put in here. You know, they want to see that you're a well-rounded student. They want to see that you have spent some time with professional organizations and you've done some things outside the classroom, as well as been successful academically. Again, they're looking in those things to figure out what your soft skills are like, how you communicate, how you work well with others, because they can't get that from a GPA. Be honest, but whenever you say you're good at something, be ready to substantiate it and to back it up with an example. Next slide. Interviews, and I think this is the most important one to remember. They expect you to be nervous. They're actually on your side. They would love, if they're interviewing 15 students in a day, a half hour at a time, they would love for all 15 to be wonderful. So they are on your side. They're not deliberately trying to trip you up. They just be able to answer a variety of questions, understand some of the basic HR questions, some of those behavior-based tricky ones, be prepared for. Don't be afraid to pause and think before you answer. And make sure you ask them some questions back, because that shows the enthusiasm, that shows the interest in them. Next slide. Then she went on to talk about succeeding in the workplace. And sadly, she had to mention the obvious things. Don't fall asleep at your desk. That tells me someone sometime fell asleep at their desk. Don't show up late to work. Well, we know people show up late to work. Stay on task. I have at NASA over the last 10 years, just at JSC, had to let 5 or 6 students go because they didn't just go to a bad website once. They went back to the bad website several times. So just the obvious things. You're there to do work. Do work. Ask questions frequently. And don't just assume. Don't settle. Don't be belligerent, but find a way using your communication skills to ask the questions of the people around you, and use everyone around you, from the secretaries on up to the highest manager that you can reasonably have a conversation with. Don't be afraid to talk to them when they have a second. And understand you're going to have to keep going back because they won't have very many free seconds. All right, next slide. I thought so. Now we're down to Q&A time. And I left all the pertinent information for NASA internships. Intern.nasa.gov is where 80% of the internship opportunities are. They have an online resume system, so you don't get to use the beautiful resume that you've created in the first part of the slide. You get to chop it up and put the information into the system. But that's not the only way you can be an intern at NASA. Each center, their HR department, has what used to be called a co-op program. Now they're called Pathways internships, just to be confusing with the other internships. And they use a different jobs website, and you sort of have to pay attention to it because the announcements come at random times. Also, each state has a space grant consortium, and many of them support undergraduate internships, not just at NASA, but in other employers in that state or in that city. So, and these consortiums are not just a single university. Typically, they're a dozen universities throughout the state. In some cases, usually both community colleges and four-year schools.
Great.
All right, I have been rambling to the point that it is nearly dark outside. So,
Well, we have some questions already forming for you, and so I'm going to share those now. So we've got this really great tool that we use. We've got questions just flowing here, but you can feel, yeah, and so some of the students have actually identified who they are that it's asking, but you can either pick one of these, and Jessica from our team, she's online here as well. She's our chat master in the chat. She and I will throw some questions to you if you need help.
Okay. I saw someone asking how many resumes do you take to an interview? Ideally, you'd like to know whether you're going to be interviewed by one or two people or whether it's going to be a panel, and then you want to make sure you have enough, because the answer is you want enough resumes for everyone that's involved in the interview process. So you definitely don't want to bring 50 in a backpack. That's a little heavy, but you know, you might bring 5, or if you know it's going to be a panel, then you might bring 10 or a dozen if you need it.
Okay. Jessica, do you see a question for Brian there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I saw it and then it went away. But there was an interesting question about students with non-traditional backgrounds who might not have the same skill set that somebody, let's say they're coming from a community college rather than a 4-year school. So how can they properly address that on their resume and really amplify all of the good things that come from a non-traditional background?
Well, let me start by telling a story. There's an educational program run at JSC called Micro-G Next, where student teams design equipment that our extravehicular activity branch may have challenges that they're thinking about. How do we collect samples off of an asteroid? Or when we're going back to the moon, how are we going to do something? And so they put those challenges out there. It's been going for 3 or 4 years. The first team that basically built a tool so impressive that the EVA folks here at JSC took it and then sent it to Florida with astronauts who were going to go diving off the Florida Keys as a way to train for space work, and they were going to test the tool there. The first team that did that was a community college team. Why? Well, because community college kids typically know what to do with their hands and have access to the mechanical tools, and they have the shop background to build a sturdy tool. So in other words, it might be that the people from MIT came up with a really great idea, but they couldn't build it well enough to demonstrate it. So if you're from a non-traditional background, you have strengths. And your strengths are different than those kids, you know, that are maybe going to MIT or Stanford. And don't be shy about putting them on there. And by the way, employers, for the most part, recognize that. So you know, think about your strengths. Don't worry that you're not given the same advantages as others. You are unique, and so you're going to have a unique set of strengths. How was that? How do you decline an offer? Very carefully. You don't want to burn bridges. What you definitely don't want to do is simply not respond. Be polite and respond. Do the best you can not to hold company A in your back pocket while you're waiting for company B to say yes. We don't like that when we're dating. Why would a company like that like you doing that to them either? I understand that there are sometimes situations where you got a good internship and then all of a sudden the best internship in the world came along. But you really want to own up to that and let them know that. And, because I was at a school where it was mandatory for students to work, they were not allowed to renege on something they said yes to, because then that employer would never come back to the University of Cincinnati to take a student again. Employers hold grudges. So recognize if you're going to say no, that you want to be very polite and be very appreciative for the offer, and it just isn't working out right now, and you're doing something else, and move on.
Thank you. I saw Ugo in the questions asked about cover letters. So how would you describe writing an ideal cover letter?
I probably have. I'll see if I can find a document that I can send out with it, and you guys can let the students have, because I haven't thought about a cover letter in a little while. But really, what you're doing in a cover letter is, in a paragraph or two, you're summarizing what you would hope that the reader would take away from looking at your entire resume, and you're tying your strength. The cover letter is your opportunity to tie your strengths into what the company is doing. So if you're writing a cover letter, make sure you've researched that company and you are A, demonstrating that you know what the company does and what the company cares about. B, that you think you have, these are skills that I have that will help you as company A to do that. And this is how I think an experience with you is going to help me become a better engineer or scientist.
I also see somebody's asking about GPA. So what is a GPA that you look for, or what's too low for working at NASA?
Well, and NASA has a hard and fast rule about you having a 3.0 or above GPA to get into the system. And the aerospace engineering field is kind of a stuck-up field that way. A lot of the employers had a 3.0 requirement. Each sort of field and industry has its own culture and personality, if you will. I was interviewed, and this was many years ago, by Cummins Engineering. So they're manufacturing engines. And they did not want to interview people who had a 3.8 GPA. They didn't think they fit into the corporate culture well. They wanted someone in the 2.8 to 3.3 range who had other things on their resume that showed they had a social life. So it varies. Once you're getting down close to a 2 now you're not standing out very well. But I think if you're, certainly in the upper 2s or 3s, it's better to go ahead and put it on there, because if you don't have a GPA on there, I'm going to assume the worst.
Good. Somebody else wanted to know if you would be able to give them an idea of what the acceptance rate is for internships at NASA.
All right. This is my pitch for NASA. Find a way to apply for a spring or a summer internship. Or a spring or a fall internship is what I'm saying, a semester internship. It's longer, which means you get more experience. And in the summer, there will be 8,000 people apply for internships. So your mathematical odds are a lot better in the fall and the spring, when people actually have to change their schedule and make sure classes work out. So you're not going to have thousands of people apply for the spring and the fall internships like you do for the summer. There are more summer internships at NASA, just like there are everywhere, but there's plenty of spring and fall, and mathematically, I think you're better off. I have not been running that program in a while, so I don't want to give you any specific numbers, but there's a lot of people that apply to a NASA internship.
Well, that was good advice, though, applying for the fall or spring.
And I think that's true for any any other employers as well. I got so much because I didn't choose the University of Cincinnati when I was an undergraduate because they had a mandatory co-op program. I just was lucky enough that was the local school and they had that. The experience I had, I was so much smarter in my classes after I had gone to work for a couple of terms. So I learned more in my junior and senior classes because of the experience I had already gotten. And my resume looks so much better than someone who went straight through a 4-year school with maybe greater name recognition because I had all that experience on my resume.
Thanks. And if I recall, during the presentation, you mentioned about taking kind of evidence of work or projects with you. A couple people have asked about taking portfolios into the interview, or this group, for example, is working on an actual PDR. So if they have a really robust PDR, would you recommend them taking things like that into the interview if it's relevant?
If it's relevant, it's always good to be prepared and take it in there. And if there's an opportunity to show that, you're going to stand out by having that, because most other applicants at your point in your career aren't going to have that. So yeah. And I think there was some good advice in there where, gather your stuff, have a nice, a briefcase, notebook, whatever it is you're carrying everything in on. Just look professional. And, don't go carrying in something that's, 3 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot, and you're carrying it over your shoulder as you go in there.
Well, we're at the tail end of our academy for the night, but we'll do one final question that I saw. Since this group is really excited about preparing and working for NASA, Okita wanted to know, what skills do you recommend that they start working on and developing now so that they have a better chance at working at NASA?
The thing about applying to NASA is that you are applying for, there's going to be 1,500 or 2,000 internships at NASA in a given year. And those internships are going to be at 10 different centers across the country. They're going to be with hundreds, if not thousands, of individual supervisors and mentors. And the way the system is set up, there might be a screening process up front to get the resumes down to a smaller number, but in the end, it's going to be those individual mentors that look at it. So with those kinds of numbers, there's not one set of skills or one set of things. Sure, the largest number of mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering is probably going to have more internship opportunities than any other specific majors. But I have a communications major working for me right now. There are almost there is a need for at least some of everything, from geologists, topologists, to every flavor of engineering that there is. So there's not one set of skills. But what you want to show is the enthusiasm. We are a nerdy group at NASA. We pinch ourselves every day that we're doing these cool things. And so as you write your essay questions and answers, we want to see that you're nerdy like us and excited about this. So that enthusiasm is really important.
That is great. Great suggestion. So, well, Brian, thank you so much. This was really helpful for our students. I could see throughout the chat they were benefiting from this. Like I said, we're going to provide the recording to all of these students so they can rewatch and go back and kind of hear from you again, and all the other students who weren't able to make it tonight. But you were great. Look at the chat. It's blowing up with thank yous. So they're also appreciative of you taking time to be here.
Well, I'm jealous of all the students. This is a really great program, and you guys take full advantage of things like this while you can. It's a great opportunity. Thank you for the time. I appreciate the opportunity.
No, thank you. I think it's now time for you to go get some rest after the day you had. Go relax.
Yep. I may have an adult beverage even.
There you go. All right. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye. All right, everyone. So, man, that was really great. A lot of really great pointers, great tips from resume building to the actual interview process. I love the do's and don'ts. It's so funny because as he was going through the do's and don'ts of interviews, I was just coaching my own daughter. She's 16 years old. She just turned 16. And on what's today? Thursday. So on Tuesday night, Sunday night we were at home, and she receives an email, and she said, "I have a job interview tomorrow," and I was completely shocked. So she had taken it upon herself to write up a resume and submit job applications to local, the mall, little shops at the mall. And so she actually she got an email with an offer for an interview. So I was giving her some of these exact same pointers for that. And on Tuesday night, we were during the Level 2 Academy, I get a text from her that she got the job. So she's a new cashier at Wetzel's Pretzels at the mall. So it's her first job, and she's really excited about it. And I was, as those slides were going through with Brian, I was thinking about the feedback I gave her. And so these tips are so relevant, in all types of jobs. And I've been in positions where I hire student workers, mentors, and fresh out of college students as well. And, just walking in with that level of confidence and being prepared really is one of the key things for your interviews. But I just thought that was really great. I think tonight we're going to kind of cut short the after show. I could stay on for a bit, but Sherry is over at LPSC, like I mentioned, so she's not on here. Jessica actually had to go as well. I do want to show you guys one thing before we go, for those of you that are still on, if I can get access to it. So Sherry just sent me a couple photos of photos at LPSC with some students. So if you guys ever have an opportunity to show up at a conference that we might be at, we definitely want to meet you guys. So let me pull these up if I can really quickly. So here is Sherry. Did everybody see her? There's Sherry with one of our students. And you can see the poster that we were talking about right behind her. So she's down in the poster area, and she's really had a great time meeting several of the LaSpacers. I'm actually going to post this picture and some of the other ones on our Instagram account, and you guys can check those out. Speaking of Instagram, I know right now we currently have a LaSpace student that's taken over our Instagram account. So she contacted me and wanting to help out with our Instagram and social media. So we're trying out Instagram takeovers. So if you guys want to be a part of an Instagram takeover, right now we're just trying out like a week long, but I think they're going to be shorter than that, maybe a couple days. We'd love to just hear from you, and we want the world to hear who you are, and to be able to see, the diversity that we've got here in the LaSpace Academy and how great you guys are. So it's a Instagram takeover. So feel free to email me that. I did already receive a couple emails tonight on as far as your projects go. Be expecting some instructions, like I said earlier, on posting the actual video. I don't want you to feel too overwhelmed about that video. So it's up to 10 minutes. It doesn't even have to be 10 minutes, but we're limiting it to 10 minutes. Basically explaining what your concept is. So you're putting your PDR essentially in a slideshow format, and this gives you an opportunity to practice presenting. So some of these skills that Brian talked about tonight, you'll have a chance to actually prepare those as well. So that is basically all I have for tonight. I'll stay on for a couple minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to, you can actually even raise your hand and I'll unmute you one at a time to ask questions if you'd like. And if not, I'll go ahead and sign off. Kayla, I'm going to reply to your email as soon as we get off of here. Or in fact, if we could talk on the phone, that would be great. Sherry is at the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference, LPSC, in Houston, Texas right now. That's where actually she and Jessica are at tonight. And she's, if you look in the participant list, you'll see Sherry's name on there. She logged on her phone just so she could kind of listen in here and there. She's really at a poster session presenting. So if you've never been to a science conference, they have what they call poster sessions. So these posters of scientists presenting their research. And so there's rows and rows of posters that you can go by and visit and learn more about different projects. So she's explaining to everyone all of the success that we've been having with the LaSpace Academy and what a great job you guys have been doing. So Anthony Klein has a question. Anthony, you are unmuted.
For the transmitter on our on the lander, do we have power and size requirements? There's only a weight consideration in the PDR, but there's no power or spatial size we need to consider.
No, not necessarily required on that, or in terms of we're not putting those limits on it other than the weight.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so we are really excited about the rest of the sessions we've got for you. Sherry's been lining up some really great speakers, and we've got 4 more weeks to go, and your PDRs are due around the corner. So if you have any questions, feel free to email lspace@asu.edu. I recommend that you send it to that email so that Sherry and I both get those, and we can help you out. So it's pretty much all I have tonight. I just realized the after show is not as exciting if it's just me by myself. I opened it up to you guys. I want to feature you too, but nobody is. Oh, thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Okay, we've got Nick here. So Nick, you're up next. You're unmuted.
Hey Dan, when can we look at getting those budget templates?
Great question. So somebody just asked in the chat. So Jessica and Sherry are actually together. The two of them have been working on it on and off. And so they're together over this week. So they're actually, I saw Jessica replied that she and Sherry are working on finalizing those now. And I do want to say, I apologize that it's been taking a while for those, but I do want to kind of put everybody at ease. So Sherry received this extensive budget template from the Lucy mission. And so it's really kind of cutting it down a little bit. So as long as you're kind of on the side, keeping track of all your numbers, it's going to be a really quick template to just plug your numbers in. It's nothing that's going to be very complicated or take much time. So rest assured, it's nothing that you'll have to spend a lot of time on.
Okay, can I also confirm the date that the PDR is due? I just want to make sure.
Sure. I can, if somebody can help me in the chat with that, that would be great, because I don't want to give you the wrong date and I need to look it up.
It's the 4th, correct?
I think we said, okay, so originally it was the 4th, and we just went ahead and extended it to Friday the 5th. So
okay.
If you guys have till midnight Pacific time to submit it, we went ahead and just said till Friday, make it kind of even week there.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I was clear on that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And so when you submit your PDRs, you're going to send that via email, and obviously a 10-minute video won't be attached. So I recommend you either upload it to YouTube and send us the YouTube link, or upload it to Google Drive and send us the link for that as well. So, but again, I have an actual video document, a kind of a 1 or 2 pager that explains the process of recording your videos and what we expect. I'll post that, like I said, to the Trello boards. I'm also going to share this slide deck, and Brian sent another list of tips, a more elaborate list that you guys can have as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Uh-huh. And Jeremy, you are unmuted as well.
I just wanted to ask, really, again, to the budget, what's a good way to gauge prices of the things that are not specified within the parameters document? Something like, I don't know, radio materials or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Do me a favor. So put that in an email to LaSpace, because I'd like to get Sherry's opinion on that as well. I mean, we would say in terms of, we want you to, do the research and try to find as best as you can. But if it's something that's way out there that you absolutely can't find pricing for, get with us on that, and we'll help you through that. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Sherry's on the cam. Let's see, where is she at? I can't see her on my screen, but maybe if I scroll through. I don't see her. It shows me that Sherry's camera is off. So so she probably is busy, with people, so she can't. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and call it a night, guys. I appreciate you guys being here. Again, hopefully you had a great spring break. And again, if you have any questions, email them to lspace@asu.edu. Look forward to it. We'll see you guys later. Have a good night. See you next week.